Buffett, quite reasonably, the first thing he said was he wanted to know why it was that his home in Laguna Hills, or Laguna Niguel, was only paying $3,000 or whatever the number was in property tax, while his neighbor was paying $15,000 or $30,000 or whatever the number was. Clearly, there was a mismatch, and Mr. Buffett said, "I think here we have the glimmers of what one of the problems is with the California budget." Well, it wasn't days before candidate Schwarzenegger essentially told him to put a sock in it. Mm-hmm. What I never understood was why Warren Buffett did put a sock in it, but he stopped talking about it. And Arnold Schwarzenegger made the obligatory genuflection to Proposition 13. He could have stood up and said, "We know this is a problem. We know there are changes we have to make in the tax system, and I'm going to put them out there, and you are going to follow me." And I think the public would have bought into that. Well, he's never done that. He really has never shown the initiative and the ability to say, "I have all this popularity, I'm going to use it, and if necessary, I'm going to spend it." Instead, he squandered it. Well, and today, he's no longer in that position. The public won't follow him anywhere.
No, and we have the numbers to prove it, because this new, relatively new poll that came out from the Public Policy Institute of California shows that only 33%, 1 out of 3 Californians, approves of the job that Governor Schwarzenegger is doing. The legislature fares even worse. Only 21% approve of the job that the legislature is doing. 1 out of 5 Californians. Does it get any lower?
And whoever the next governor is going to be, as long as we don't change the way we elect our politicians in California, they're going to have the same issues that Governor Gray Davis had. We're going to have the same issues that Governor Schwarzenegger's had. As long as we keep the system in place and we don't have a nonpartisan election, the next governor will fail, because Republicans will say no to taxes, Democrats will say no to cuts, and they're going to go back to borrowing, and we're going to go off the cliff. There'll be a Republican they'll go after. It might be me again. And they'll say, "We need some help. We need some reasonable people here to reform the state in order to push it forward." So I think it just shows the dysfunction that we have. And I understand what Mike's saying. I happen to disagree with him. I don't want to see it that it's a revenue problem. Yeah, California might need to change the way it finances itself, but we have folks up there that have an addiction to spending, including Republicans. Jim is right. So we have some challenges, and I believe that in order for the next governor to succeed, there needs to be electoral reform in California.
Senator, thank you. We'll be back with more LA Roundtable in just a minute with a guest with another perspective, so don't go away.
You know, honey, I've been thinking. You're not prepared for an earthquake. Take this antique vase your mom got you. If the big one hit, it'll be a goner. Or this clay penguin you made in 3rd grade. History. By simply strapping loose furniture to the wall and putting putty under loose items, you can prevent serious injury and damage. Nothing is safe, even poor Uncle Petey. Get the message? Be prepared.
I got you something very special for our 1st anniversary. Now close your eyes. Surprise! It's an emergency preparedness kit. Isn't it great? It's got food, water, first aid kit, and this neat emergency tool for shutting off utilities. Honey, we are going to be prepared for any emergency. Honey? Sweetie, I have one more surprise. This really cool cranking flashlight.
Get the message? Be prepared.
Welcome back to LA Roundtable and our discussion of California's dysfunctional state government. I want to thank Senator Abel Maldonado for having been part of the panel in the first half of the show, and welcome Joel Fox. Joel is former president of the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the group which spearheaded the passage of Proposition 13 and many other tax reform measures. He's now a lecturer in public policy at Pepperdine University. Well, you've heard a lot of discussion already about Prop 13. The charge is that it's in large part responsible for the fiscal mess that California is in. I know you don't agree.
The charge has been made for 30 years, and I guess I've disagreed for 30 years. A couple of points on Proposition 13. First of all, let's remember the environment when it came about. And people losing their homes to uncontrolled taxes. Proposition 13 put a control on those taxes, and it did it in such a way that not only are people not losing their homes, but the property tax is the most stable of all taxes in California. It goes up until this tremendous mortgage crisis. It's been going up steadily in Los Angeles County, 7% a year. That's above inflation. We have more property tax revenue than we ever had before in constant dollars. So I think the change has been positive both as a protection for the taxpayer, and it hasn't cheated the local governments. Saying that, some of the earlier discussion, I do agree there has to be some restructuring of the tax system.
Including Prop 13,
no,
or are you excluding it?
I would exclude it because, as I just described, I think it's working well.
Well, I think if you're talking about restructuring the tax system, but you're leaving Proposition 13 alone, that's like saying we're going to restructure the auto industry, but we're not going to touch Ford, GM, or Chrysler. I mean, this Proposition 13 is the ballgame. The reason that we have this over-reliance on the income tax is because of Proposition 13. The reason why we have an over-reliance on the sales tax is because of Proposition 13. And I think Joel made my point for me. The property tax is the most stable source of revenue for a government unit, particularly a local government unit. And we've spent 30 years trying to maneuver our ways around the rocks in the river that Proposition 13 gave us. We had, just in the last few months, an op-ed, I think it was in the Los Angeles Times, by a government official from San Diego who said, you know, since Proposition 13, one of the things it did was it took budgeting power away from the localities and gave it to Sacramento, and that's been the cause of a lot of mischief. It's meant that we here in San Diego haven't been able to get the money to fix our streetlights and pave our roads, because every time we want to do that, we discover that the money that our property taxpayers are sending to Sacramento is being used to close the state budget deficit. All of the maneuvering that followed Prop 13, the swaps, the backfills and all that, these are all signs that there was something fundamentally wrong with that initiative and that legislation, and we have never, ever come to grips with it. And the longer our political leaders talk about how it's the third rail of California politics, the voters won't stand for altering it, we can't touch it, the deeper that misconception, as I think it is, gets instilled in the electorate, and the harder it is to do what we have to do. I mean, even the idea of a split roll, of assessing commercial and industrial properties in a different way from residential properties, seems to be untouchable. It seems to be one of the most sensible things we can do to help close the budget gap and redress the imbalance of how commercial and industrial taxpayers fund the budget compared to residential taxpayers. Why aren't we talking about this more seriously?
You know, I think anyone in politics understands they are working for the electorate, and the electorate sets the ground rules. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go back to the electorate and say, revisit this initiative that you passed 30 years ago. And I think parts of that might be open for revision, like Prop 13 reduced the property tax by 2/3. So 2/3 of the money was eliminated. Bills and people's property taxes reflect that. They went down. The other third went from local government to Sacramento. So if you want to talk about returning that third back to local government, I think that has some merit. If you want to talk about increasing the property tax, particularly for residential homes, I just think no politician is going to get too close to that. But I do think there is a tax which could be expanded. And I know the governor's and Karen Bass's Committee on Revenue is looking at the sales tax, which could be lowered. The sales tax was put in place when we had an industrial society, and the bulk of economic activity was manufacturing. Now the bulk is services. The sales tax would be lowered. The state percentage of, say, LA County sales tax is about 5 cents. You lower that to 3, and then you expand that to law firms, accounting firms, car repair, haircuts, services would be covered by the sales tax. That's a very stable tax, and that could generate over time additional revenue. I think the public would be open to that kind of discussion.